But because of some of that buy-in, now a lot of these guys trying to get ready for the stretch run of this NHL regular season. We're well past the midway point, just like in the NBA, the focus on trying to position yourself for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Joe, we're back in action with NHL regular season games tomorrow on a Saturday. As we look at the Stanley Cup odds, how do you expect the NHL to carry the momentum over into the stretch run of this NHL regular season?
Well, firstly, you got to be careful with a couple of these players if you're looking at their player props getting back out on the ice Saturday. Team Canada definitely will be celebrating, and a couple of injuries out there. We know that Shea Theodore, Vegas, was injured, and Matthew Tkachuk, not 100%, didn't finish the game up for Team USA. So watch for those players. I think Connor McDavid probably weak in his first game. But looking at the rest of the season, you guys, I do think the Carolina Hurricanes are a team that you need to watch here to take the Stanley Cup. Great odds on them at plus 700. Adding Mikko Rantanen, we saw how impactful he was in the tournament for his team, and I do think he's such a difference maker. But Colorado, don't sleep on this team. I think some big moves are coming before the trade deadline. We know we got Nathan MacKinnon here and Martin Necas coming in on this team from Carolina. The speed of those two out there on the ice is going to be unstoppable. So those are my two picks for the Stanley Cup.
We'll go conference by conference, and we'll talk the individuals for this stretch run of the NHL season with Joe Madden on the other side of the break, live right here on the early line on SportsGrid. Come back and join us. After the Four Nations face-off, not a long break for hockey to return in the stretch run of this NHL regular season. Tomorrow, a slew of games around the National Hockey League, much like the NBA with the All-Star break, but now the Four Nations face-off break. We're well past the midway point of this season. Stretch run trying to get in those spots to reach the Stanley Cup postseason. Joe, we looked at the Stanley Cup odds on the other side of the break. Here, let's go conference by conference to break things down. In the Eastern Conference, you highlighted the Carolina Hurricanes. Why do the Canes present such a challenge for every other team out east?
Yeah, you look at Mikko Rantanen added to this lineup from Colorado, and he is such a clutch player in the playoffs. I do think they're the most rounded team out there when you add him. They have the defense, they have the forwards, and they have the strength in net. Now, Carolina has had those struggles out there on the road this season, so they're going to have to start overcoming it as we go into the second half of this stretch. But we know Carolina has every ability to show up in those big moments, and I do think they will be able to do so as we go into the second or the end of this season. So I also look here at Mikko Rantanen with how strong he is. Top 10 forward out there. I'm still kind of shaking my head how Colorado traded him away, but I do think Carolina did win that trade. He has he's on pace for 100 points again this season, which will be the third straight season. He's just clutch in those playoff moments. So I think Carolina will be able to get over the hump this season with him added to the roster.
If we keep it in the Eastern Conference here, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Austin Matthews, Team USA, not able to get it done with a championship here in the Four Nations. Is there a chance that he can get a championship done finally for the Toronto Maple Leafs this year?
You know, I would love to say it here for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but we know what happens as this team goes into the playoffs. We're seeing these struggles each and every year, and it's because of that. Just not a team I can buy in on. I also think we're not getting the value on Toronto. I know they're plus 700 to take the Eastern Conference right now, but I think they're always a little bit overpriced. So if I was getting maybe plus 850, more like what we're getting for the Tampa Bay Lightning, especially with how we've seen some struggles out of them, that's where I would prefer to look at Toronto at this price at plus 700 right now, though. I just don't think they can get it done. I do think there's a couple of weaknesses. One is goaltending for them, even though Wall has had some fantastic games. I think as we turn into this last stretch here, we're going to see some of these teams really hit him.
The best record, the most points out in the Eastern Conference, a surprise this year in the NHL, the Washington Capitals. A 7-1 price, tied for that fourth best number to win the Eastern Conference crown. Now let's head out west. You mentioned the Colorado Avalanche, who won a Stanley Cup very recently as well. What is it going to take, Joe, for the Avs to win the West once again?
Yeah, the Avs have every ability to come out here and win the West. I love what we're seeing out of them. We know Nathan MacKinnon did so strong in the Four Nations, and he's going to bring that right back to Colorado. I love who they picked up with Necas here, and I do think this team is going to make another big trade before the trade deadline. I really do think they could be after Sidney Crosby. They're off after a huge superstar. Now, Pittsburgh won't like to hear that, but I do think Sid deserves to be on a team that has every ability to get the win. The Pittsburgh Penguins, we know, aren't going anywhere this season. If somehow Colorado can get Sidney Crosby, we saw the connection between Nathan MacKinnon and him at the Four Nations. I think this team would be absolutely unstoppable, you guys.
Joe, talk to me about the Winnipeg Jets, because it's been a long time since Canada has won a Stanley Cup. The most points in the NHL right now, it is the Winnipeg Jets with 81 points and a win streak of 8 straight games before heading into the short all-star/break here for the competition, the Four Nations. How about the Jets in the second half and the chances they can win a cup?
Well, let's just hope the Winnipeg Jets don't fizzle out here, because we saw that last season where this team was playing so incredibly hot. And then we saw that fizzle out, and then they weren't able to get it done. So all hopes here, Connor Hellebuck. We know how strong he is in net. We know this power play is absolutely electric out there on the ice. If they can go into the playoffs continuing to play this strong, let's just keep our fingers crossed for the Winnipeg Jets. But plus 600 to take the Western Conference, there is value there, you guys.
Quickly, Joe, final minute of this segment. Can Nathan MacKinnon carry over the MVP performance in the Four Nations face-off to the tail end of this regular season?
Yeah, he absolutely can. Nathan MacKinnon is such a superstar out there on the ice. And I do think with Necas out there, we're going to see a ton of goals out of Nathan MacKinnon in the second part of this season here. Look for him to be just on fire out there on the ice. And you're looking at their schedule, he has a lot of opportunities to pull off some hat tricks out there.
The odds-on favorite right now, Leon Draisaitl for the Oilers. Didn't see him in the Four Nations. He is German. Joe Madden, thank you so much. Enjoy the celebrations today in Canada. Hour number 3 comes away next. Welcome to hour number 3, our third and final. Live right here on this Friday morning on the early line on SportsGrid. He is Donnie Rightside. I am Ben Stevens. A ton to get to here in this third and final hour. We will look at a monumental college basketball slate on this Friday that continues into Saturday, that continues into Sunday. In 3 weeks from Sunday is Selection Sunday for the NCAA men's tournament in 2025. All of these games take on an added bit of significance by the time you reach this stage of the conference season. And a lot of NBA action as well, returning from the All-Star break. Another 9-game slate around the association on this Friday as well. DRS, before we get to all of that, our final takeaways from the Four Nations face-off. And will the NHL be able to convert all of those new hockey fans into long-standing hockey fans? We'll hear from the people and how juiced up they are to keep watching some hockey. A big third hour here to end out the week on TEL.
By the way, a great move by the NHL. Do away with the All-Star game, which nobody cares about likes or wants anymore. You have the Four Nations tournament, which is great. But hear me out on this. Like, the Four Nations tournament should just be really the Two Nations tournament at this point. We used to have back in the day when I was growing up in the 80s and early 90s, like let's call it like the Summit Series, like a 7-game series between Canada and Russia. And they would just go toe-to-toe like it's the Stanley Cup final. How about next time around, Ben? You removed it because, quite frankly, hey, Sweden, fantastic. Finland, fantastic. The side pieces of this tournament, if you will. You have Team USA, Team Canada in a 7-game series where it rotates like 2 games in Canada, 2 in the U.S., 1 back in Canada, 1 in the U.S., 1 back in Canada for game number 7. That's the next level thing we need here. Because we didn't need the fodder of the other teams. We just want to get right down to the main event. That would be an unbelievable thing to bring back those huge Summit Series, which we used to have back in the day.
I wonder what the plan is moving forward, right? I don't exactly know the schedule around the NHL next year, but I do know that for the first time in a long time, since 2010, we are going to have NHL superstars back in the Olympics, representing their countries in the Winter Olympics next February of 2026 in Milan. We are hoping that we get the enthusiasm and the excitement that we saw in the Four Nations face-off, or we saw in Vancouver in 2010, the golden goal for Sidney Crosby to beat the Americans in OT. We're hoping we see that in 2026. Are they going to do the Four Nations face-off like every year? instead of the All-Star break, then does it lose some of its luster? Well, yeah, I figured because the Olympics, but like 2027, are we going to continue to do the same thing? Thanks, Freeze.
You know
really
what?
Good stuff.
Four nations, then the Olympics. Same time? Who says no, man? Let's go.
Just keep
like
going.
Really double down on it. Yep.
In an entire season of just Canada versus the U.S. versus Sweden versus Germany, all in always. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But it will be interesting, Donnie, to build on this momentum, not just for future years of potential four-nation face-offs, but also what we are going to see during the tail end of this NHL regular season. A lot of people tuned in last night. Can't wait to see what the numbers are. 4.4 million viewers on Saturday up in Montreal to see the United States beat Canada, the highest rated TV product for hockey outside of a Stanley Cup final in 5 years. I bet you the numbers were even higher last night. But is that going to continue for the National Hockey League down the stretch run of this season into the Stanley Cup postseason? Let's hear from the people. Will you watch more hockey? Basically the question in Fade the Public. At SportsGrid on Twitter, after the Four Nations face-off, do you now plan to watch more hockey than you previously did? We gave you three choices. More than before, less than before, same as before. And Donnie, the runaway winner, with nearly 69% of the vote, says same as before. That's how I voted. I wonder how you voted. More than before, though, about 26%. So at least a little bit of growth we can expect for some hockey fans out there. DRS, how did you vote in this Fade the Public poll?
Yeah, the people that voted more than before means they never probably watched the game this year. They'll watch one, so that qualifies for a 30% or 25% of the vote at this point. Less than before is funny because most people will tune in and say, hey, I'm going to get back to my team. But for me, same as before. Why? Because my Flyers stink. They've stunk for like a decade now. There's no reason for me to get excited about Flyers hockey except for who they might be able to draft and get in free agency with Danny Briere as the GM and so forth here. But also, equate it to any other sport here, specifically the niche sports. And yes, I'm sorry, NHL backers, it is a niche sport here. If you look at the four major sports, it's four, and it's a long way to even get to that number 3 spot. But also, understand this with Kickoff. You take a look at the Masters. I love the Masters. I am enthralled the week of the Masters, the Wednesday we have the hole-in-one competition, the tournament from Thursday through Sunday. Then I go back to watching absolutely no golf until we get to the next major at that point. So a lot of people are the same. You bring in the big events, we'll watch. That was a sensational big event here. But for me, I'm going to watch the same as before, which is, the Flyers are on? Yeah, who cares? Next.
Yeah, I voted for same as before as well, right? We also work in sports media, so we have to be a little bit more tuned in. At least we try to be to everything that is happening around the National Hockey League. Am I going to change my sports consumption? Am I about to turn on all the NHL games tomorrow in lieu of college basketball? Sadly, no, I'm not going to do that. Am I going to be excited to watch a little bit of playoff hockey in the intensity of the Stanley Cup final as I do year in, year out? Yeah. That's basically my hockey knowledge. That is basically my hockey watching. And I'll be excited to do it once again. But there is something entirely different, DRS, for national pride, right? For pride of the letters across your chest, for wearing that flag that you represent. And I think that speaks even to the common fan, right? It's not just your geographic area, the team that you root for, your franchise. You don't really have to love hockey or whatever sport you watch. And you're like, we got an international competition. Let's go the United States. Let's go Canada. Let's go Sweden, so on and so forth. It pulls at your heartstrings and your emotions a little bit more than just regular season or even playoff competition. It was great for the sport of hockey. There is no doubt about it. 26% of our Fade the Public poll saying they're going to watch more hockey than before. They enjoy the game. It is exciting. It is fast-paced. But most is same as before, and that's okay, right? To appreciate these standalone events, to appreciate these premier events that we see. That's a really good thing as well. It doesn't have to be A led to B. It doesn't have to be Four Nations face-off was awesome. Now, the NHL is the biggest sport in this country. It can be the Four Nations face-off was awesome. I'll keep watching some Stanley Cup final games, and I can't wait for the next time we see an international best-on-best competition.
Yeah, and right. And also the funny part, the shrapnel gets hit with the NBA, who they have their All-Star weekend. They're probably some ridiculously low numbers and nobody cares. Like, hey, look what the NHL is doing at this point. What Adam Silver is going to turn around and try to make it more watchable, as opposed to, I saw one of the tweets, which was great. It's like, we just got done the Four Nations tournament. And the NBA was out here playing Team A versus Team B to play Rising Star Team C. And away you go. And then guys like LeBron James, who are like, you know what? This is such a bad effort. I don't even want to be remembered as I put on a jersey for this thing. Let me wear my street clothes here, take a picture with the guys with jerseys, and leave and get out of town before the All-Star game even starts here. So long way to go there. But I did appreciate the energy, because it's very rare where I got to be in front of my TV for a hockey game, other than like the Flyers used to be in the playoffs and try to make runs to a Stanley Cup when I was younger in my life, and that was great. But it's just nice to be able to, in the middle of the winter, be like, you know what? What's on tonight? Hockey's on? Absolutely. I got to watch this game to see how it plays out, or at least how it starts, and be sort of in that fandom here. And for a week and a half, the NHL/Four Nations tournament, boy, they really did right by our society, picking us up and getting us something to really chew into after the Super Bowl run.
It feels significant. It feels special because it is significant and it is special. Can it be replicated? The NHL saying they don't really have any plans in place to do the Four Nations face-off again in 2027 or 2029. That's fine. You don't want to mess with something that was so great and then not have it live up to expectation. Yeah. Will the NBA follow suit? Will we see other all-star games try to replicate this? Maybe. I would just charge all sports leagues, even collegiately, to know why this worked. It was the purity of the sport in putting the fans first. Keep that in mind. More on the early line next.